Guadalcanal. August 1942, rain falls in sheets over the choking green of the jungle. The air is thick. Gunpowder and rotting vegetation blend into a smell that never leaves the lungs. A squad of U.S. Marines crawls through the mud, their boots sinking with each step. Somewhere ahead, the sharp chatter of automatic fire tears through the trees. The sound of Japan's new Type 100 submachine gun. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to never miss the next story. Bullets whip past leaves, splintering bark. The Marines freeze, gripping their rifles. Long, heavy, wooden. Outdated, some had called them. The M1 Garand. 8 rounds of .30-06 Thunder that could decide the line between living and vanishing. One Marine steadies his breath, sights through rain and shadow, and pulls the trigger. A single shot cracks, then another, echoing louder than the enemy's burst. In the distance, the Japanese gun falls silent. Silence, except for rain. It wasn't speed that won the exchange. It was precision, power, reliability. In the jungles of the Pacific, where rust ate steel and mud jammed every moving part, one truth was written into history. The outdated M1 Garand would prove deadlier than Japan's advanced. Type 100, the rise of Japan's modern weapon and the Pacific's new kind of war. By late 1941, the world stood on the edge of fire. Europe was already drowning in the thunder of panzer divisions and air raids, but across the Pacific, another storm was forming. One that would redefine warfare in the world's most unforgiving terrain. Japan's empire, fueled by a fierce mix of nationalism, industrial ambition, and militaristic pride, had already conquered swathes of Asia, Manchuria, China, French Indochina. Now, with the strike on Pearl Harbor, it sought to break the last great barrier to dominance in the Pacific. The United States. In Tokyo, Japan's military planners envisioned a fast, lightning-style campaign built around mobility, aggression, and the spirit of the infantryman. Their doctrine was clear. Wars are won by men, not machines. For decades, the Imperial Japanese Army had emphasized close combat, bayonet charges, infiltration tactics, and unwavering discipline. It was a philosophy born from Bushido, the samurai code, adapted to the machine age. But as the empire expanded, Japan's leadership recognized a growing problem. Their soldiers were brave, but their weapons were falling behind the industrial world. While the West was experimenting with semi-automatics and precision machining, Japan still relied heavily on bolt-action rifles like the Arisaka Type 38, reliable but slow. In 1940, engineers at the Nambu Arms Manufacturing Company began developing something new, a compact submachine gun inspired by European designs, the Type 100. It was Japan's first and only mass-produced submachine gun during the war, chambered in 8mm Nambu, firing at about 450 rounds per minute. On paper, it was a modern leap forward, light, automatic, and perfect for close-quarters jungle fighting. But the reality was more complicated. Only a handful of elite paratroopers and special assault units would ever receive it. Japan's manufacturing capacity was limited, and its weapons industry could never match the scale or precision of American production. The Type 100 was rare, expensive to make, delicate in build, and often assembled by hand. Even before the first American Marine set foot on Guadalcanal, Japan's advanced weapon was already fighting a battle it couldn't win. Reliability. Still, to the Imperial Army, the weapon symbolized progress. It was sleek, new, and distinctively Japanese, a machine meant to enhance the warrior's spirit, not replace it. In training films and propaganda reels, the Type 100 was shown cutting through mock enemy positions with effortless bursts of fire. Its message was simple. Japan, too, could master the tools of modern war. Meanwhile, Across the Pacific, the United States was preparing its own transformation, one far larger in scope. American troops had long relied on bolt-action rifles like the M1 Springfield. Accurate, yes, but limited by rate of fire. In a world increasingly defined by mechanization and mobility, that would no longer suffice. In 1936, after years of design trials, a new rifle entered U.S. service, the M1 Garand, named after its inventor, Canadian-American engineer John C. Garand. At first, many officers doubted it. Too complex, too heavy, they said. The conservative minds of the old army distrusted the idea of a semi-automatic standard rifle. But war has a way of silencing tradition. When the United States was thrust into global conflict after Pearl Harbor, it discovered that its experimental weapon had become its greatest equalizer. The M1 Garand could fire 8 rounds in rapid succession. Powerful 30.06 cartridges, capable of punching through cover and armor alike. Its gas-operated mechanism recycled automatically after each shot, giving soldiers near-automatic speed with rifle precision. For the first time in history, an entire army marched to war armed with semi-automatics, not a privileged few, but every infantryman across the Pacific. Japan's soldiers would soon discover what that meant. Because when the fighting reached the islands, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, battles would not be fought on wide-open plains or rolling fields. They would be fought in jungles, ravines, and volcanic ash, where humidity rusted bolts, where mud jammed barrels, and where the man with the weapon that worked was the one who lived. The Pacific War would become not just a clash of empires, but a duel between two philosophies of firepower: Japan's faith in spirit and aggression, and America's belief in engineering and endurance. And, in that duel, two weapons stood as symbols of their nation's souls: the sleek, elusive Type 100 and the unassuming, rugged M1 Garand. The rifle that redefined American firepower by early 1942. As the U.S. military scrambled to recover from the shock of Pearl Harbor, one thing became clear: this war would not be won by courage alone. It would be won by endurance, precision, and production. And the symbol of that shift lay in the hands of every U.S. soldier. The M1 Garand. General George S. Patton would later call it the greatest battle implement ever devised. That was not mere hyperbole. In a time when most armies still relied on bolt-action rifles that required manual cycling after every shot, the Garand represented something revolutionary: seamless fire. 8 rounds delivered in seconds, with a crisp mechanical ping as the clip ejected. The sound of modern warfare being born. But the story of the M1's success wasn't written in factories alone. It was written in the philosophy of its design. John C. Garand's semi-automatic system used expanding gases from each fired cartridge to automatically chamber the next round. It was reliable, mechanically balanced, and surprisingly simple for mass production. A design that could withstand rain, sand, or mud without jamming. For an American soldier, that meant power and confidence in every firefight. For the Japanese, who often carried lighter, less powerful weapons, it meant facing a storm of fire that could be delivered with deadly accuracy and speed. While the M1 became the backbone of American infantry, Japan's weapon development struggled to keep pace. Their factories lacked both the materials and the industrial infrastructure of the U.S. mainland. American production lines, driven by assembly precision and standardization, could churn out Garands by the hundreds of thousands. In contrast, Japan's complex logistical chain, spread across occupied territories, dependent on sea routes, and plagued by Allied bombing, produced the Type 100 in mere thousands. By 1943, the U.S. had already armed nearly every frontline soldier with an M1. Japan's elite paratroopers and select units in the Pacific still had to share their limited stock of submachine guns, often reverting to bolt-action Arisakas when the Type 100s jammed or failed in humidity. This disparity reflected something far deeper than just industrial might. It was a difference in how each nation viewed the soldier's role in war. In Japanese doctrine, the rifle was an extension of the warrior, a tool of spirit, not science. A soldier's bravery could overcome inferior technology, their doctrine insisted. That belief, rooted in centuries of martial tradition, shaped not only Japan's training, but also its armament philosophy. Submachine guns, automatic rifles, and mechanized vehicles were seen as Western tools, secondary to discipline and morale. In America, the view was almost the opposite. The rifle was a machine, a device to make the soldier more effective, more lethal, more capable of surviving the chaos of battle. Efficiency was not dishonor, it was duty. As both sides advanced deeper into the Pacific, this philosophical divide grew sharper. In the humid jungles of New Guinea, U.S. Marines carried their M1s through rain and rot. They cleaned them nightly, oiled the bolts, and relied on their precision in firefights, where visibility stretched no more than 20 yards. Each Marine knew his rifle could deliver steady, relentless fire. Even when mud coated his hands or rain poured down his helmet, Japanese infantrymen, on the other hand, often faced a cruel irony. Their Type 100, meant to dominate close combat, faltered in the very environment it was designed for. The gun's exposed recoil spring rusted easily. Its 8mm Nambu cartridge lacked stopping power against an enemy charging through thick brush, and its slow rate of fire, while controllable, could not match the shock effect of American semi-automatic volleys. By mid-1943, captured reports and field diaries from Japanese officers began revealing frustration. Some praised the Garand as a fast rifle of much power. Others noted the difficulty of closing distance against its fire. One Japanese unit report from the Solomon Islands even described the M1's rate of fire as machine-like, an acknowledgement that technology had altered the balance of infantry warfare. The Pacific wasn't just proving ground for nations, it was a laboratory of adaptation. Each engagement, each exchange of fire, taught new lessons. That speed and accuracy together could crush even the most disciplined advance, and that a weapon's reliability could determine the fate of entire units. Soon, those lessons would crystallize on the muddy slopes and dark jungles of Guadalcanal, where Japan's elite forces, armed with their advanced Type 100s, would face the test of a weapon they once dismissed as too simple, too heavy, too American. The Pacific jungles would soon give their verdict, not in words, but in survival. Every weapon, no matter how advanced, is ultimately defined by the hands that hold it. For the American infantryman in the Pacific, the M1 Garand was not just a rifle. It was reassurance. Its solid walnut stock and cold steel offered a sense of control amid the chaos of jungle warfare. Veterans would later describe its rhythm like a heartbeat. Crack, crack, crack. Steady, dependable, and familiar. A Marine could squeeze off 8 rounds with mechanical confidence, reload in seconds, and keep fighting while his enemy struggled to work a bolt or clear a jam. The weapon's semi-automatic action gave U.S. troops something intangible but vital: time. In an ambush or sudden charge, a single second often separated life from death. The Garand gave that second back to the soldier. By contrast, Japanese troops, disciplined, fearless, and often fighting to the death, carried their Type 100s with pride, though few ever held one. For those who did, the weapon's light recoil and controllable bursts made it effective in ambushes or night raids. But it demanded constant maintenance. In the jungle, where rust formed overnight and sand found its way into every spring, that maintenance was a luxury few could afford. Japanese soldiers wrote in diaries about cleaning their weapons under rainfall or disassembling them by moonlight, trying to keep them alive for the next fight. The Garand's users did the same, but with far less fear, because their rifle worked. In the end, it wasn't just a question of design. It was about trust. And in war, the weapon a man trusts becomes an extension of his will. Every battle in the Pacific revealed a clash of range and doctrine. The Type 100 was designed for short-range dominance, fast, sweeping fire in tight spaces. But most Pacific battles didn't unfold that way. The dense vegetation, sudden clearings, and shifting visibility meant engagements often began at 100 to 200 meters, far beyond the effective reach of a submachine gun. The M1 Garand, firing full-power rifle cartridges, excelled in that range. American squads could suppress enemy positions before they even came into view, forcing Japanese troops to crawl closer under punishing fire. The Garand's effective range was nearly 500 yards, more than 5 times that of the Type 100. The result was psychological as much as tactical. Japanese units accustomed to closing the distance found themselves pinned down long before they could use their automatic fire effectively. Their famed banzai charges, fierce, desperate rushes meant to overwhelm by sheer courage, began to fail with devastating regularity. Marines would line their sights through the trees, wait for movement, and unleash bursts of semi-automatic fire that tore through advancing ranks before they were even within grenade range. At Tarawa, at Peleliu, at Guam, the story repeated itself. The Japanese charged with faith and spirit. The Americans replied with precision and steel. The Garand turned the battlefield from a contest of bravery into a contest of marksmanship and mechanical reliability. The result wasn't just tactical superiority. It was a redefinition of what infantry firepower meant in modern war. To understand why the M1 Garand succeeded where others failed, one must look beneath its wooden stock. Its design was a masterpiece of balance. A gas-operated rotating bolt system that channeled energy cleanly, reducing recoil and increasing accuracy. It could fire in the rain, through dust, and even after being dropped in mud. The Type 100, though visually impressive, suffered from structural weaknesses. Its open-bolt design made it susceptible to contamination. Dirt entering the chamber could cause misfires or stoppages. The weapon's 8mm Nambu cartridge lacked both velocity and penetration, and its magazines, curved, thin-walled, and manually loaded, often warped in heat or humidity. Japanese engineers tried to improve it with later versions, adding dust covers, bayonet lugs, and simplified parts. But these fixes came too late. In contrast, the Garand entered service already robust, battle-tested, and built for mass production. The technological divide wasn't merely one of innovation. It was one of philosophy. Japan sought refinement in craftsmanship, each weapon carefully machined, assembled by skilled hands. America pursued efficiency, interchangeable parts, assembly lines, speed. That difference echoed in the field. When a Type 100 malfunctioned, it required tools, patience, and spare parts that might never come. When a Garand jammed, which was rare, a soldier could clear it with a quick pull and be firing again in seconds. This reliability created confidence, the kind of quiet, unshakable confidence that rippled through entire units. A Marine squad that trusted its rifles could advance through hell itself. An enemy that doubted its own weapons, no matter how brave, would always fight with hesitation. The Pacific War was not only a test of courage or numbers. It was a crucible of design, a trial by humidity, heat, and chaos that separated what merely worked on paper from what endured in blood and rain. And as the war intensified, this divide, human, tactical, and technological, would only grow wider, revealing deeper truths about the nations that forged these weapons. Behind every trigger pulled in the Pacific was a chain of production thousands of miles long. The rifle, the cartridge, the oil that kept its bolt clean, all of it depended on a nation's ability to build, move, and sustain. Here, the United States possessed an advantage so overwhelming it could hardly be measured. From 1941 onward, American factories became engines of war unlike anything the world had seen. Springfield Armory and Winchester alone produced over 4 million M1 Garands by war's end. The rifles arrived in crates marked for every front: North Africa, Italy, Normandy, and the Pacific. Each crate carried not just weapons, but the industrial heartbeat of a nation united in purpose. Shipyards on the East Coast, railroads through the Midwest, and foundries in California all worked in rhythm, forging steel, cutting walnut stalks, and packing the instruments of survival. Japan's logistical map, by contrast, was fragile and fragmented. Its empire stretched thin across the Pacific, from the Aleutians to New Guinea. But its production centers remained concentrated on the home islands. Each rifle, each magazine of ammunition, had to cross vast distances by sea, through waters increasingly dominated by American submarines. By 1944, those supply lines were breaking apart. Whole garrisons fought with dwindling ammunition. Maintenance kits vanished. Spare parts for Type 100s became treasures traded like gold among units. Some soldiers scavenged broken guns from fallen comrades. Others modified Arisaka rifles to mimic automatic fire. A desperate act in a war of attrition. Meanwhile, on the American side, logistics meant abundance. Garands, ammunition, cleaning kits, and replacement parts flowed continuously to the front. The average Marine or infantryman could rely on resupply within days, even on isolated islands. This consistency allowed American troops to train harder, fire more, and trust their equipment completely. The Type 100, despite its engineering promise, simply could not survive such a logistical storm. It was a precision weapon born into a world that demanded mass and endurance. In the Pacific, reliability was not a technical feature. It was a logistical miracle, and it was one the United States could afford. Every army fights with more than weapons. It fights with ideas. For the Imperial Japanese Army, the rifle was more than a tool. It was a symbol of personal honor. The warrior, not the weapon, was the instrument of victory. Their officers preached that the spirit of the bayonet mattered more than firepower. Courage could conquer even a machine gun nest. This doctrine produced soldiers of extraordinary bravery. At Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Iwo Jima, Japanese infantry often fought to the last man, refusing surrender even when surrounded. Their faith in the human spirit was absolute, but faith alone cannot compensate for physics. American leadership, particularly figures like General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz, viewed warfare through the lens of logistics and modernization. Their strategy emphasized overwhelming firepower, precision bombardment, and coordination. The Garand fit perfectly into this vision. It represented efficiency, uniformity, and technological superiority. It was not crafted for ceremony. It was built to win wars. In contrast, Japanese leaders often treated new weapons with suspicion. The Type 100 submachine gun, though advanced, contradicted decades of doctrine focused on individual skill and spiritual willpower. Some commanders saw automatic fire as wasteful or dishonorable. As a result, production remained limited and distribution inconsistent. This hesitation reflected a deeper tension in Japan's wartime culture, between tradition and technology. The army revered Bushido's stoicism, while the modern world demanded mechanical evolution. The United States, by embracing innovation, found the balance that Japan could not. When Patton praised the Garand, he was praising more than a rifle. He was celebrating a mindset, a belief that the tools of war could amplify courage rather than replace it. There is a moral dimension to every technological advantage. For the men on the ground, it wasn't statistics or design blueprints that mattered, it was survival. The Garand made survival more likely. For many American soldiers, that reality carried both gratitude and guilt. War correspondents from the Pacific often describes Marines emerging from firefights dazed, not from fear, but from the speed of victory. "They never had a chance," one Marine wrote after a skirmish in Bougainville. "Their guns just couldn't keep up." The Type 100, elegant though it was, became a symbol of a nation's overconfidence in tradition. It was modernity filtered through an outdated lens, a tool too rare, too fragile, too late. For Japan's soldiers, it represented both pride and loss. Many who carried it saw it as proof that Japan could still match the West's innovation. Yet on the battlefield, that pride often ended in frustration, jams, weak cartridges, or simply too few guns to matter. War stripped both sides of illusion. The Garand proved that innovation without arrogance saves lives. The Type 100 proved that honor without practicality can cost them. In the end, every shot fired in the Pacific carried the echo of those two truths. That progress in war is not about invention alone, but about the willingness to adapt, evolve, and endure. The rifles had told their part of the story. Now, the jungle itself would deliver the verdict. For soon, on the blood-soaked island of Guadalcanal, the philosophies behind these weapons would collide head-on, and history would choose its victor. Guadalcanal, where steel met spirit. Guadalcanal, August 7, 1942. At dawn, the first major American offensive of the Pacific War began. The island, a tangled stretch of jungle and volcanic ridges in the Solomon Chain, was more than just land. It was a symbol. Whoever controlled it would control the sea lanes between America and Australia. For 6 months, men fought, bled, and died over those few miles of green hell. And among the roots and rain, two philosophies of war collided. Japan's belief in spirit and ferocity, and America's belief in machinery and method. The first engagements were small, brutal, and confusing. Japanese patrols, armed with Arisaka rifles and the rare Type 100 submachine gun, prowled the jungle edges, ambushing Marine positions. Their movements were silent, ghost-like. Their discipline, perfect. But when they struck, the Marines struck back with something Japan had never seen. A line of rifles that fired faster than any bolt action, more accurate than any submachine gun, and strong enough to cut through palm trunks. The first Marine to fire his M1 Garand in anger on Guadalcanal described it as a kick of thunder in my shoulder. In seconds, entire bursts of Japanese fire were answered by a steady rhythm. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of disciplined semi-automatic volleys echoing through the rain. The Garand was proving itself not in theory, but in blood. In mid-August, near the Tenarue River, a battalion of Japanese soldiers launched one of the war's most ferocious counterattacks. Screaming "Tenoheika Banzai!" they charged across open sandbars toward entrenched Marine positions. Many carried swords. Some had rifles. A few, perhaps a dozen, carried Type 100s. The Marines waited, their M1s resting on sandbags, barrels steady. When the enemy broke the tree line, the night exploded with light. 8 round clips snapped and pinged as Marines reloaded in unison. The Garands spat flame, deliberate, rhythmic, each shot a hammer blow of 30-06 power. The Japanese Type 100s answered with bursts, but their 8mm rounds dropped short, their range far too limited for the open crossing. Within minutes, the riverbank became a storm of lead and screams. Marines rotated positions flawlessly, firing and reloading with clockwork precision. Those few seconds of reload, the famous metallic ping as the clip ejected, were covered by comrades in overlapping arcs of fire. The Type 100's strength, close-range speed, had no place here. It was a weapon built for ambushes, not assaults. The Garand's longer reach and sheer firepower turned every approach into slaughter. When the smoke cleared at dawn, nearly 800 Japanese soldiers lay dead or wounded. the Marines lost fewer than 40. It was not courage that had failed Japan, it was doctrine. As the campaign dragged on, the island itself became the enemy. Rain fell for weeks without pause. Rifles rusted overnight. Foxholes filled with water and disease. In this hell, the M1 Garand's reputation only grew stronger. Marines learned to sleep with their rifles across their chests, bolts oiled, clips dry. Japanese soldiers, carrying Type 100s or Arisakas, suffered constant mechanical failures. The submachine gun's open bolt and delicate springs collected dirt like magnets. Some soldiers tied rags around their receivers or coated them with grease. Desperate measures that only worsened the jams. Captured. Reports from Japanese officers after the battle confirmed what the Marines already knew. Enemy rifle fire is continuous, rapid, and of great power. Difficult to close distance. By October, the Japanese High Command realized Guadalcanal was draining the Empire's best units for little gain. Yet their soldiers refused to yield. They attacked again and again through monsoon, starvation, and malaria. Each time, they met the same steady rhythm. 8 rounds of thunder, precise and unstoppable. The Garand had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol of endurance, of the American ability to fight through exhaustion, to hold a line through discipline rather than desperation. Guadalcanal's outcome marked a psychological shift as much as a military one. Before the campaign, Japanese troops had viewed Americans as soft, materialistic soldiers who relied on machines instead of spirit. By 1943, captured diaries told a different story. Japanese infantrymen now spoke of the M1 Garand with grudging respect, calling it a repeating rifle of exceptional strength. U.S. intelligence units, reading intercepted Japanese communications, noted increasing references to the enemy's superior rifle fire. For the first time, Japan's vaunted infantry, the pride of its empire, felt technologically outmatched. The Garand didn't just win firefights, it shattered an illusion. It proved that a machine, when perfectly designed and relentlessly supplied, could equal and even surpass the human spirit in combat effectiveness. For the Americans, Guadalcanal became a baptism by fire, the first taste of what the Pacific would demand. For Japan, it was the beginning of a slow realization. Courage alone could not stop the industrial momentum of an enemy that turned engineering into survival. And as the fighting spread across the islands, Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, the same verdict repeated itself. Everywhere the Garand went, it brought with it precision, endurance, and inevitability. But Guadalcanal was only the beginning. The true test of these weapons, and the philosophies behind them, would come as Japan's empire began to crumble, its soldiers trapped on isolated islands, its supply lines cut. And in that desperation, the difference between faith and function would grow ever more deadly. The Island of Iron and Hunger, 1943-44. By mid-1943, the Pacific had become a graveyard of ambition. Each island, from the black sands of Tarawa to the coral ridges of New Georgia, was another brutal contest of endurance, technology, and will. The Americans were no longer fighting for ground alone. They were fighting to perfect a rhythm, a method of war that could outlast chaos itself. And at the heart of that rhythm was a single 8-round rifle. Tarawa was only 1 square mile of coral and death. When the Marines landed in November 1943, they stepped into hell before sunrise. Many drowned before they even reached the beach. Their landing craft stranded on reefs under a curtain of Japanese machine gun fire. On shore, the defenders waited in reinforced bunkers. Elite troops armed with Arisaka rifles, Type 92 machine guns, and the rare Type 100 submachine gun for close defense. For 76 hours, the island erupted. Every palm tree burned. Every bunker became a furnace. But through that chaos, the Garand's rhythm held firm. Marines, soaked and deafened, advanced yard by yard, their rifles spitting thunder. The semi-automatic action allowed them to clear bunkers faster, cover fire teams during reloads, and keep pressure on enemy snipers who never expected such relentless accuracy. One war correspondent wrote, "The Garand's report is the sound of progress. One rifle that sounds like many." The Type 100s, in contrast, were nearly silent in their failure. Sand clogged their chambers. Salt air corroded their springs. In close quarters, their short-range bursts often cut down charging Marines, but those moments were brief. Desperate flickers before the weapon jammed or ran dry. In 3 days, Tarawa was secured. 4,600 Japanese defenders were killed. Only 17 surrendered. The cost was horrific for both sides, but the lesson unmistakable. Firepower that sustained itself, not just in bursts, but in rhythm, would win the Pacific. Japan still clung to the belief that Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit, could overcome industrial might. But the Pacific's machinery was merciless. Spirit could not unclog a jammed bolt. Honor could not dry a corroded firing pin. The Type 100, elegant in its design but fragile in reality, represented that fading ideal. Its rate of fire, 800 rounds per minute, was impressive, but its reality on the battlefield was a weapon that overheated, jammed, and struggled to find ammunition. Japan simply could not produce enough 8mm Nambu cartridges to keep up with the needs of its scattered garrisons. Each island's defenders rationed bullets like gold. Some Type 100s went into battle with fewer than 100 rounds total. The M1 Garand, on the other hand, fed on a supply chain as vast as the Pacific itself. Ships, planes, and factories back home poured millions of clips into crates that followed the Marines wherever they went. Every soldier could fire without hesitation, knowing there would always be another clip, another crate, another shipment. War favored not the brave, but the prepared June 15, 1944, Saipan. The invasion that would bring the American war machine within striking distance of Japan itself. The island was a fortress. Tunnels, caves, machine gun nests carved into rock. The Japanese 43rd Division fought with suicidal determination. They had dug in, prepared to die, and among their weapons were hundreds of Type 100s. A last attempt to turn mobility into survival. When the Marines landed, they faced fanatical resistance. Type 100s barked from caves, spraying bullets across narrow trails. But once again, the Garand's precision tore through the jungle. Marines learned to fight the terrain itself, using grenades to flush out bunkers, then advancing in short bursts of rifle fire, each shot deliberate. One Marine sergeant later wrote, "The Garand wasn't just faster, it was dependable. You could drop it in the mud, pick it up, and it would still shoot straight." In the final hours of Saipan, thousands of Japanese soldiers, including civilians, charged in the largest banzai assault of the war. The Type 100s screamed in close-range chaos, but they were no match for hundreds of Garands firing in unison. The battlefield turned into a storm of thunder. 8-round volleys echoed through the night, reloading and firing in a rhythm so perfect it sounded mechanical. By dawn, the charge was broken. Saipan had fallen. That battle didn't just prove American firepower. It proved endurance. Every rifle, every clip, every steady pull of the trigger was a statement. This war would not be won by desperation. It would be won by design. By late 1944, the Type 100 was already a relic, produced in small numbers, cherished more as a symbol than a weapon. Its users called it graceful, but unreliable. Its enemies called it rare, but ineffective. The M1 Garand, in contrast, became the standard of modern warfare, a weapon that married precision with production. It wasn't the most beautiful. It wasn't the newest. But it was relentless. And in war, relentlessness is victory. Across the Pacific, captured Japanese officers wrote of their frustration. "We cannot match the enemy's rifle. Their shooting never ceases." The myth had shattered. The empire built on willpower and tradition had met an enemy built on mechanics and innovation. And in that meeting, spirit had met its limit. But the final chapter of this comparison was still to come. In the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the Japanese army would unleash its last reserves, its most desperate men, its most fearless charges. And once again, the same sound would fill the air. Not the hiss of the Type 100's short bursts, but the heavy, disciplined thunder of the M1 Garand. The jungle had already given its verdict. The islands ahead would only repeat it. By 1945, the Pacific had become a slow-motion catastrophe for Japan. Each island taken was another artery cut, another base silenced, another reminder that the empire's industrial heart could no longer keep pace with America's machine of war. The M1 Garand had by now become more than a rifle. It was an emblem of inevitability. From Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, its distinct metallic ping had echoed through jungles, mountains, and beaches, marking the cadence of American advance. Each ejected clip symbolized another push forward, another position overrun, another victory secured by the relentless rhythm of semi-automatic precision. The Japanese Type 100, by contrast, had slipped into obscurity even before the war ended. Its design, once ambitious, had been betrayed by its own circumstances. Japan's limited access to quality steel, poor machining tolerances, and the scarcity of high-grade lubricants meant the Type 100 was fragile in the very conditions where the Garand thrived. Captured specimens studied by Allied ordnance teams revealed telling flaws: inconsistent welds, brittle recoil springs, and misaligned bolts. Its magazines, crafted from thin steel, often warped under field stress. Even the cartridge, the 8mm Nambu, lacked the energy to deliver stopping power at range. The M1 Garand fired the 3006 Springfield cartridge, a powerhouse developed from decades of experimentation in American ballistics. It could punch through cover, penetrate helmets, and still deliver tight accuracy at hundreds of yards. That difference in ammunition alone redefined firefights across the Pacific. While the Type 100 was designed for close-quarters combat, clearing trenches, caves, and bunkers, it rarely achieved its intended effect. Most Japanese soldiers never saw one. It was too expensive, too slow to produce, too delicate to trust in the field. Out of Japan's entire wartime output, fewer than 30,000 Type 100s were ever built, compared to over 5.4 million M1 Garands produced by the United States. The result was not just a technological victory. It was a philosophical one. America's success wasn't born in the trenches, it was forged in its factories. Every Garand that reached the Pacific was part of a vast logistical ballet. Springfield Armory, Winchester, and dozens of subcontractors working in perfect unison. Crates left Massachusetts and Illinois by rail, crossed oceans by convoy, and reached Marine hands in time for the next landing. Even in the chaos of global war, production barely faltered. Assembly lines ran 24 hours a day, powered by women and men who had never seen the battlefield, but whose work defined it. Japan, on the other hand, fought against the physics of its own geography. Every part of the Type 100 supply chain was fragile. The steel came from Korea and Manchuria, the tools from Osaka and Nagoya, and the ammunition from factories already under bombardment. Each Allied air raid meant fewer guns, fewer parts, fewer chances to repair or resupply. By 1944, the Imperial Army had resorted to desperate measures, arming soldiers with outdated rifles, bamboo spears, and makeshift grenades. The Type 100, once touted as a sign of modernization, became a ghost weapon, admired but unseen. Weapons shape not only battles, but the minds of those who wield them. For American soldiers, the M1 Garand became a companion, dependable, familiar, and almost alive. Veterans often described it as an extension of their own will. If you had your Garand, you felt ready for anything, one Marine said years later. In contrast, Japanese soldiers were taught that their rifle, the Arisaka, was to be treated as sacred, not mechanical. Maintenance manuals emphasized respect more than practicality. Cleaning rituals became spiritual exercises, not technical routines. That reverence, while admirable, left no room for adaptation. When humidity swelled wooden stocks or rust crept into chambers, Japanese troops often lacked the materials or training to improvise repairs. In America's military, by contrast, every soldier was trained not just to fire, but to maintain his weapon. Manuals, training films, and demonstrations drilled the same lesson. A rifle was only as good as its upkeep. This cultural contrast created a battlefield imbalance. Where the Garand gave confidence, the Type 100 demanded faith. And in modern war, faith alone was not enough. By the time American forces reached Iwo Jima in February 1945, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Only the cost remained. The Garand's reliability once again proved vital. In volcanic ash, choking dust, and the heat of endless bombardment, it functioned without complaint. Japanese defenders, trapped in tunnels and caves, made desperate use of what Type 100s they had left. Many were found abandoned beside their owners, jammed or empty. After the island fell, U.S. ordnance officers collected dozens of surviving examples for study. Their reports described the Type 100 as a weapon of skillful design, compromised by poor materials and inferior ammunition. It was an epitaph written not only for a gun, but for an empire's approach to modern war. The Garand, on the other hand, would live on in Korea, in training manuals, in the hands of every nation that studied American doctrine. Its mechanical rhythm had outlasted the empire that once mocked it. Its sound had become a memory, a cold, metallic punctuation to the end of an age. And yet, even as the war neared its conclusion, one last lesson remained to be written, not in the factories or jungles, but in the ashes of surrender. When Japan surrendered on September 2, 1945, the silence that followed felt unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath after years of constant thunder. In that silence lay two stories, one of innovation rewarded, and one of tradition defeated. The M1 Garand had not merely armed an army, it had armed an idea that technology, when refined through discipline and purpose, could become a decisive weapon of survival. The Japanese Type 100, elegant but fragile, told the opposite tale, that craftsmanship without scalability could not sustain an empire at war with modernity itself. When American occupation forces began cataloging captured weapons, the results spoke volumes. Thousands of Arisaka rifles were collected, many rusted and aged. Hundreds of Type 100s were found, some in mint condition, never issued. The rifles were studied, photographed, and sent to ordnance schools for examination. American officers noted their lightweight design and controllable recoil, but also their weak cartridge and limited presence. In field reports, the Type 100 was listed as ineffective beyond 100 meters and not representative of standard Japanese armament. In contrast, the Garand's reputation had transcended even the battlefield. Every captured nation, from France to the Philippines, studied its operation, its tolerances, its flawless gas system. Engineers from Britain and the Soviet Union dissected it for insight into future, semi-automatic designs. It had become the blueprint of post-war infantry warfare. Treaty, close of the Second World War, did not end the M1 Garand's service. It merely began its legacy. In Korea, it would fire through ice and sleet. In Europe, it would train new generations of soldiers who had never known bolt-action fatigue. Its principles, reliability, gas operation, and rugged simplicity, would inspire future weapons like the M14 and even echo faintly in the architecture of the M16, the Type 100. On the other hand, faded into the museums of memory. Few survived the war intact. Even fewer were used again. Japan's post-war constitution, which disbanded its armed forces, ensured the submachine gun story ended where it began, as a relic of ambition undone by industry. Yet, within Japan's weapon labs, the lessons had been internalized. Engineers like Kojiro Nambu, who once designed the 8mm cartridge, would later admit in private notes that Japan's faith in spiritual strength over mechanical innovation had doomed its military modernization. In post-war decades, as Japan rebuilt itself through technology and manufacturing, the irony was profound. The nation that once underestimated industrial efficiency would become its global master. Every rifle tells two stories, one of those who made it, and one of those who used it. The M1 Garand, in its perfection, symbolized progress. But progress came with cost. On every island, every ridge, every shattered beachhead, thousands of young men, American, Japanese, Filipino, Australian, fell to weapons born from human ingenuity. The Garand's precision was merciless. The Type 100's bursts were desperate. Together, they formed the soundtrack of the Pacific War, a mechanical chorus of invention and loss. Historians often measure wars by victories, but the soldiers who survived them measured by memory, the smell of oil on steel, the weight of a rifle in the rain, the ringing ping of an empty clip echoing through smoke. Those sounds, mechanical, simple, unforgettable, became the heartbeat of a generation that learned how technology could both save and destroy. In the years after Japan's surrender, American occupation transformed the nation's weapon factories into civilian industries. Mitsubishi began building cars instead of bombers. Nagoya Arsenal's forges were repurposed for consumer goods. And in those same foundries that once machined the Type 100, Japan would one day produce the world's finest cameras, electronics, and industrial tools, proof that the war's true legacy was not in the weapons, but in the lessons they forced humanity to learn. The M1 Garand, meanwhile, remained an icon in American culture. It marched in parades, appeared in films, and rested in veterans' closets as a link to their youth. It represented an age when design and determination aligned perfectly, when one rifle, simple and precise, helped shape the outcome of the most devastating conflict in history. By the 1950s, as the last Garands rolled off the assembly lines, the age of the semi-automatic rifle was giving way to the automatic. The world was changing again, faster, colder, more industrial, but the lessons of the Pacific, of the Garand and the Type 100, endured in every new weapon designed thereafter. Reliability over complexity, simplicity over style, and endurance over ideology. The M1 had outlived the empire it fought, and outlasted the century that made it. It stood as a symbol of a truth every soldier would come to understand. That victory, in the end, belongs not to those with the most courage, but to those with the most consistency. The thunder of war had faded, but its echo remained, in the museums, in the memories, in the 8-round rhythm that once defined a generation. And from that echo, a final reflection was waiting. The measure of a weapon, the measure of a nation. In the stillness that followed 1945, the world finally began to count what it had lost. Not just lives or cities, but illusions. The illusion that bravery alone could match machinery. The illusion that tradition could outlast innovation. The M1 Garand and the Type 100 were never just weapons. They were philosophies made of steel. One represented the faith that human precision could be enhanced by technology. The other clung to the belief that spirit could replace it. Both were born from pride, but only one adapted to reality. The Garand embodied an age when American industry and individual skill worked in perfect harmony, where every rivet, every weld, and every worker's hand contributed to a singular idea. Reliability wins wars. It was not beautiful in the way the Type 100 was. It was utilitarian, heavy, loud, but in its simplicity lay an elegance of purpose. The Type 100, refined and compact, mirrored Japan's devotion to craftsmanship. Yet it fell victim to the limits of that very devotion, a weapon too finely made for a world too chaotic to sustain it. Where the Garand tolerated dust and rust, the Type 100 demanded perfection. And war has no patience for perfection. When historians look back at the Pacific, they often speak of strategy, code-breaking, or atomic fire. But the truth lies just as much in the soldier's grip, in the click of a bolt, in the sound that echoed through 1,000 jungles, the sound of progress overtaking pride. The Garand's legacy is not that it was deadlier, but that it was dependable. It gave the ordinary soldier the power of consistency, the confidence that his weapon would not fail him when everything else might. The Type 100's legacy is quieter, a reminder that brilliance, without endurance, fades. In the end, the Pacific War was not only a clash of nations, but a clash of ideas, industry versus isolation, adaptation versus rigidity, the future versus the past, and when the smoke cleared, it was clear which idea would shape the next century. The M1 Garand fired 8 rounds, but its echo has lasted for generations.